fighting for the 99%, wanting to be in the 1%, while giving it less than 10%. Stand Up with Pete Dominick.
What's more interesting than talking to a person that is a reformed racist, especially now? Yesterday, we introduced you to Christian Picciolini, and our next guest was listening and called in, which was awesome. It was a great moment for us, and I think especially for Christian. And Scott Shepard joins us right now. He is a former white supremacist, a former Ku Klux Klan leader, who is now an anti-racist activist. He was recently profiled at the PBS Independent Lens, and Scott Shepard joins me now. By the way, everybody should follow him. He's good on Twitter. I want to give him as many followers as we can. At Reformed Racist. At Reformed Racist. Follow him now. Scott Shepard, thank you so much for joining us today. Great to have you on the air.
Glad to be here, and I sure hope Christian can join us again today.
I don't know. I don't know if he's listening or not, but believe me, we'll keep the conversation going with you and him and both of you. Either way, really appreciate your time. I was reading about you and your life, and it's fascinating, Scott. Saw that video I just mentioned where you are in this video sitting down throughout the video with the woman who was there when you were born and helped raise you, 100-year-old woman named Becky, who happens to be black, and it is fascinating. Tell us about her and what role she played in your life before we get to where things changed.
Sure, Becky is actually now will be 103 in October, and she's still alive and still spry and just as sharp as she was back when I was a kid. Becky joined our family actually before my mother was born. She was there when they brought my mother in on a pillow when she was born, and then she raised, like I said, she raised my mother. She raised my older brother, raised myself, and raised my older sister and younger sister. And actually, she was in the room when I was born, and I'm named after her. Her name is Rebecca Scott Hawkins, and I was named after her.
Wow. I mean, yeah, in the video, we learned this woman who is going to be about to be 103 years old was, she says, the first face you saw as when you were born, potentially. And so that just makes your narrative, your story, that much more interesting. What about your parents? Tell us about your mom and dad.
Well, my mother and father, of course, my mother's passed away now, but I wasn't raised by racist parents. My mother and dad divorced actually when I was probably about 10 years old, but I was raised in a dysfunctional family, and my dad was very violent alcoholic, and had played a big part in the bad decisions I made. And with that being said, I'd like to say that I take full responsibility for the decisions I made and the things that I did in my past. And there were some contributors to it that affected it, but I take full responsibility for the things I did.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, but I don't know. I'm kind of a radical in my thinking in that I'm not sure how any of us can take full responsibility for even the worst choices we make if we thought those were some of the only choices. Sometimes we don't all have the resources and choices to make what society would call the best, mature, most thoughtful choices. But either way, what about your mom? What role did she play in your life?
Well, my mother basically raised all these kids, all of the kids, and of course, like I said, they divorced. My mom and dad divorced, and she pretty much raised all of us. She really struggled, pretty much. Of course, she was a school teacher, but she was a school teacher at the time, when the schools were being integrated, and the schools were very much in turmoil, and the whole system was just out of whack. And so she really didn't continue teaching. She moved on to Texas, and we went with her for a while. But she was pretty much the backbone of the family, even though she struggled really hard and had faults too.
We've got Scott Shepard on the air right now. Scott is a former white supremacist now. You can follow him on Twitter at Reformed Racist. He is spending his life trying to right the wrongs that he made for 21 years, I think, that you were kind of living this life and in these organizations and groups. But before we get to that, I mean, you said you were an angry child. Your dad's alcoholism. You're an angry. Did you not fit in? We were talking about this yesterday with Christian. Was that part of your life too? You didn't have a group, an in-group. You were angry and emotional because of the situation that you were in. Your dad was a violent alcoholic, even though I know you loved him. What was it?
Oh, yes, that's basically what played a big part with it. It had no stability in the home life at all. I felt like an outcast and was angry. I didn't have any self-esteem. I just didn't, I was just unhappy. I didn't like myself. I didn't like anyone. And it played a big part in me searching out a place where I belonged and, filled the void within myself. And, at the time right there with all the racial problems going on in the 60s and 70s, I was born in 59. I'm 58 now. The Ku Klux Klan was right there in our backyard. But again, I could very well have been joined ISIS and I even did reach out to the Italian mafia. Of course, I was so naive at the time. I didn't know I didn't know you had to be Italian to get involved with.
You could maybe just done an internship or something. That's funny, right. Scott. But I mean, why you say ISIS, the mafia? You just wanted to hurt people? These are all groups that we consider to be, bad, evil, terrorists. Why did you want to be involved with any of the groups like this, much less the Klan, which you obviously got involved with in the end?
Yes, and of course there's also the Irish Republican Army that I had reached out to.
Oh, I'm sorry, your list wasn't over, Scott. Is there any other horrific group that you're? I wanted to be in the band Kiss. That's not fair. All right, so but what was it psychologically? What was it that made you interested in these groups, much as being part of them?
Well, I was drawn to that dark side and that violent side. And, of course I got to a point where I was so angry. I wanted to lash out against the system. I wanted to lash out against anyone. And of course, I guess looking at these groups, the Mafia and the the Irish Republican Army at the time, they were really active. And I said, these folks are doing things, not just talking about it. They're really doing it.
Right.
And that's something that really struck a chord with me. And then, of course, the Ku Klux Klan, too, was, very much more active then also.
So you were obviously vulnerable, and someone figured that out. Who was it? How did it happen? How did you become radicalized and a white supremacist?
Well, basically, I went to Tupelo, Mississippi when they had of course, down here we say Mississippi, not Mississippi, but went to Tupelo. And they had a Klan rally there, and I talked to some of the Klan leaders and some of the other members there. And, of course, I guess, they picked right up on the issues that I had. And they put their arm around my back, patted me on the shoulder, said, yes, we'll be your family. We'll be your protector. We'll protect you, take care of you, and teach you. And they did. They just taught me the wrong things.
How long were you involved in the Klan and a white supremacist, and what were your main roles?
Well, I joined, and of course, when I was about 16, 17 years old when I got involved. And, of course, today the Klan organizations, where there's more than one Klan organization, they're just not one group now. They're broken up in different factions, and they've got different leaders, different beliefs. Somewhat different beliefs. They still fall in line with white supremacy, those. But I guess over my period of time, I was in probably 2 or 3 different Klan organizations, and that was right at about 21 years. And, of course, my role ended up, I was pretty much involved in recruitment mainly throughout these groups. And, of course, at the same time I was involved with Klan groups, I was also involved in other white supremacist groups, David Duke and the National Association for the Advancement of White People, and then he formed another organization. There was the League of the South. There was, the National Alliance. If they had a white agenda, I was pretty much involved with them or connected to them somehow. And like I said, it was basically on a recruitment level, but I did rise to the level of Grand Dragon for the state of Tennessee for one Klan group. And that is equal to, in politics, the power level would be like governor of a state.
Wow.
And then you have Imperial Wizard that would be like the president. And I did jump from Grand Dragon to an Imperial Wizard stand for a short period of time for the old murder knights of the Klan that are no longer in operation. Actually, when I left, those members joined other people. They wanted to be a really violent and militant organization, and that, of course, I was very hesitant about that and didn't get involved with them.
What's it like to have to? Was it like harboring that kind of hatred? Did you feel certain emotions when you saw a person who was a minority? Were there some that kind of raise your ire more than others? Gays, Jews, blacks. Well, what did it feel? Can you describe what that psychologically, emotionally would feel like, or did you have no feelings about it? What was it like?
Well, I did have feelings, and the reason why I know this, because, the whole time that I was involved in these groups, I always had this little bitty voice in the back of my head that, always say, do you really believe the things you're preaching or saying? So I always had a little doubt. And then, of course, it's actually the Jewish issue. I really never did get involved in the anti-Jewish part or really. I did it. Now, I'm just as guilty as the others because I did espouse that later on. But I really didn't have a problem with it because, I was raised, in Mississippi with, a Jewish community. And they were friends of mine, and I just didn't look at them as any different.
But you were also raised by a black woman who we talked about right at the beginning.
Absolutely.
What happened with your relationship with her during this time?
Well, during that period of time, of course, when I drifted off into this Klan and white supremacist movement, I withdrew. I withdrew from her. I withdrew from her family. And her family was my family. And that's just what it was. And I withdrew from them. And did not see her for years and years and years until I was able to, break away from that life. And then I went to her door and knocked on her door. And of course, she answered the door and her arms were open. And nothing was ever said about it since other than, what we do now.
Unbelievable. That's just an unbelievable. And everybody should watch that video. I posted it on Twitter and my Facebook page. We're talking to Scott Shepard at Reformed Racist. Give him a follow right now on Twitter. A fascinating guy with an amazing story. So you're doing this for over 20 years. You rise in the ranks. You're recruiting others. What changed? How did you get out of this life and this mentality?
Well, like I said, the voice was always there, and I think that made me a little more vulnerable vulnerable wouldn't be the wrong word, but made it a little bit easier for me to get out of these groups. But I always had that little bitty voice, and then, of course, at the peak of me in these groups, I was in Nashville, Tennessee, and at the time they had some mail bombs that was going off in the state of Alabama and Georgia. And I think they had killed a lawyer and a judge or injured them real bad. I do think one actually died. But these mail bombs were going off, and the lawyers were civil rights lawyers, and I think there was a judge that had made some rulings against white supremacists, and it made it look like that it was a white supremacist plot, which it turned out not to be. It was just a lone man who had got in trouble with law enforcement before and with pipe bombs and was striking back at the system. But, of course, I knew it all at that time, but my big mouth and the things I was doing, I was praising the strikes, of the bombs and everything, the Klan was making a move and, putting out the message that, they're not going to take this anymore. Well, I came up on the radar of the FBI and I was being watched by the police. I was in a restaurant in Nashville, Tennessee, and left that restaurant. And sure, I had been drinking, and when I was eating, and of course, they pulled me over, and I got out of the car. And I didn't see just one or two blue lights. I saw an ocean of blue lights. There was police cars everywhere.
Huh.
Well, I failed a sobriety test, and I also had an illegal weapon underneath the front seat of the car. So they got me and threw me in jail for a few days. That threw me into the court system. And then, of course, when I was into the court system, I said, well, I'm going to use the same trick everybody else does. I'm going to go to the Alcohol and Drug Treatment Center, get paperwork, take it back to the judge, and just have these charges dropped and go on with my racist life. Well, much to my surprise, when I went into this drug treatment center, I went in one person and came out another.
Really? It was your experience at rehab that changed you.
Right. And the experience was actually, I had, when I got inside, of course, you know, the director of the place is Cumberland Heights in Nashville, Tennessee, where I was at, and he told me, he called me into his office. He said, you know, we've got, you know, blacks here, and we're in a cabin atmosphere. You're going to be sharing a cabin with several people. I said, yes, I understand. I just want to get my paperwork and go. So, of course, they put me into this cabin, and then we had to go through the group meetings, and I had to participate in all that if I wanted to get through it to get the paperwork. Well, I had to sit down with all these people and the different people, and we did, and we shared our life stories, intimate details about our life and our problems, and just a whole gamut of things. And, you know, I got to know these people and found out, you know, they're no different than I am, and I'm no different than they are, and I had forgotten these things. Being that I was raised by a black lady, I had really forgotten these things. My hatred and my anger and everything had just taken over and consumed my entire thoughts, and this brought me back down to earth. That brought me back down to earth.
I want to ask Scott so many questions. I got so many more questions for you as I did yesterday with Christian Picciolini or anybody else who's gone through what you went through. We're talking to Scott Shepard at Reformed Racist. I only have a few more minutes, but I wanted to ask you quickly about, I want to talk about current events, but I wanted to ask you, when you were in the Klan, I've always wondered this, and you were there for, like we said, over 20 years. Eventually, the FBI was surveilling you. You told this story just now. You get pulled over and the DUI and the gun and everything. But did you always, and do Klan members and other extremist white supremacists assume that, or take precautions for when, you know, the FBI or ATF or whoever else may have infiltrated you, may have gotten a spy inside the Klan? Is that something that you were always wary of and maybe hesitant to trust people until you could really figure that out? Because I like to believe that our federal authorities are doing their best to infiltrate these extremist groups, whether they're ISIS-inspired or white supremacists or whatever. Was that a thing that everybody talked about, worried about?
Oh, yes, it was very much talked about. And, of course, they did take precautions to try to, weed out any kind of informants or locate them or, find them within the group. I do remember when I went to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, to a national Klan rally where most of the members went for that year. Before we were able to even enter the building or talk to any of the Klansmen on the inside, we had to go through a process. We actually stood in line and went through, and they had their own lie detector box. We had to go in the box before we could even pass through to go into the system. Because, yes, they were pretty, with technology, they were up on it, and that's how they did it, for this meeting, was a lie detector box. And they had men trained to operate it.
Wow. What do you think of what's happening in our country right now with the racial issues that we're having and have been having, not since, obviously, the election of the president, but we've been having them for a long, long time. We saw the dispute between police officers and black communities that we've seen and allies on both sides for years. Obviously, the election of a black president was symbolic. So what do you think are some of the touchstone moments in the last year or few years that have you concerned or maybe feeling better about things? I don't know.
Well, I'm really saddened by it to start with, because, I remember years ago, back in 1986 and 87, probably the last, before Charlottesville, probably the last major big uprising of white supremacists was in Forsyth County, Georgia. And there was a lot of, mostly Klansmen there, but there was a lot of them. I mean, 500 to 1,000 marchers then, in which there's probably more in Charlottesville this time. But I think that's what really bothers me and surprised me. When I first saw that, I said, oh, my gosh. You know, what has happened is they've taken off their robes and their hoods.
Yeah.
And, of course, these are plainclothes people, and they're opening their face up. They're no longer scared to be seen in public. And what they've done is they have increased their roles or size behind closed doors and behind, underground somewhat. And I had no idea that it would continue to grow that fast and that large. And it's really scary. I think it's more scary now than it was. Where you take 5 Klansmen standing up against the wall, 5 Klansmen in robes and hood, you know what they stand for. You take 5 of these people that were Charlottesville, plain clothes, no mask,
preppy. Yeah.
You don't know what they stand
exactly.
for. One of them could be your next door neighbor
right.
or even your cousin.
Or a family member, a direct family member.
Exactly.
Scott, I'm out of time, but I'm not done talking to you. First of all, if you're ever in New York and don't come in studio and give us the opportunity to meet you, I'd be disappointed. So please do that. And we'll keep you in the conversation and email me, and I'll reach out to you privately to thank you and to talk more with you and learn more from you. It's amazing what you've done with your life, and we really appreciate you spending time with us today.
Well, I appreciate it and look forward to visiting y'all in New York. I get up there sometimes, not often.
Well, I'll buy you whatever you drink or eat or whatever. Scott, really great talking to you. At Reformed Racist, give him a follow right now. It will be a hard transition to go from Scott Shepard to Maria Menounos, but I am a professional broadcaster and host, and I have a great team behind me, and there goes Alfred to get Maria Menounos, everybody. Should be shocked at his mustache.